All right, so we've got Garrett here today to do a little gait analysis. And Garrett's a chiropractor in Ottawa. We have done some work together in person before ages ago, like 2016 or something. He studies a little bit of anatomy in motion, and so he's got a bit of an understanding of gait and closed chain biomechanics, but he's asked me to take a look at what I see. Some of his complaints include bilateral Achilles tendon, grumpiness. He's a long distance runner. He's also recently had a bit of lower back stuff. So let's see what we see. I don't have any static posture photos, so we're just gonna have to look at what shows up in motion, which is more exciting anyway. First thing we're going to do is watch him in full speed walking, see what stands out, and then we'll break this down phase by phase. Here we go. So first glance, just see if anything stands out to you in a big picture sense. Write down anything you notice. Awesome. That was fantastic. Okay, let's watch that a bit slower. And maybe I will say a couple of things as they come up. Knowing that he has bilateral Achilles issues, look at what's happening in his heels. Do you see a lot of movement in his calcaneus? And I'm talking about a frontal plane motion, so a tipping in and out or inversion, eversion. Didn't really see a whole lot. Let's see what his feet look like from a front view. Well, you can kind of see that neither of his knees really go into that much valgus. They don't point in very much, especially his left leg kind of points out into more of a knee over pinky toe angle. So that's some lower body stuff. But there was some funky business up top. So if you watch his pelvis, there's one side that hikes and one side that doesn't really hike. And I am seeing that left side staying more hiked than the right. I wonder if he's got any history around that left hip, lower back area in particular. Oh, hold up. Looks a bit different from the front. Looks like he is actually hiking his right hip. We're gonna have to put that on pause, that thought. But I'm gonna reverse him back just a little farther so we can watch another thing with his rib cage. Pelvis we're gonna look at more closely, but there's some rotation in his rib cage that I think is pretty asymmetrical. At least that's what it looks like. You can see his left arm swings back a lot farther, and it looks like his rib cage rotates to the left a lot more than to the right. Let's see what that looks like from the front. It's always a bit of a mind fuck when from the front you see one thing and from the back you see the opposite thing. But I think he is rotating his rib cage more to the left. Then he goes center, then he goes left, then he goes center, but he's never properly getting to the right. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. All right, well, I would like to see that broken down phase by phase so we can see what stands out. Now, remember that gait doesn't really tell us where the problem is, but it will show us where things are getting wonky with his movement mechanics, and that will guide further investigation. So let's we want to get him, make sure he's a few steps into his rhythm, and let's put him into a right heel strike to begin. So we're looking at the right foot, and when his heel just meets the floor, right about there. So that's our right heel strike. Now, to me, it looks as if he's landing quite medially on that right foot. Heel strike, we want to see more of a posterior and lateral heel contact. So it's interesting. He also has quite a bit of a pointed out foot. So those two things combined, of toes pointing outwards and contact point more medial, is kind of a pronated foot vibe. If we follow that up to his knee, it kind of looks to me like his knee is bent a bit more than we'd like it to be. With that kind of pointing out of the foot, we'd expect that we might see a little bit of an internal rotation up into his hip, or femur at least. And with that internal rotation there, we might start to see more of a bend or more of a flexion in that knee, which couples nicely with a pronated foot. However, those things are not what you want to see at this particular moment in time. We want more of a supinated foot, more of an extended knee, and not an internally rotated hip. So that's going to change the timing of everything that happens next. If you're already heel striking with a pronating looking foot, what happens next when his foot is actually meant to pronate? What will we see? Let's find out. So we're going to roll his right foot into pronation. And man, it gets there pretty fast, doesn't it? If you watch the speed at which his foot gets from heel strike to pronation, it's maybe 3 frames. So that's pretty fast. Maybe that's totally okay. I don't know, but that seems a little fast to me. Now, interestingly as well, so he's kind of on that medial contact point. Let's zoom it in a little bit. But it doesn't look like there's any kind of motion in his actual calcaneus when his foot lands on the floor. We'd like to see further pronation happening, but he might already be kind of there and there's nowhere left to go. It's a bit of a rigid landing. So I don't know so much about the quality, that pronation. Now, just an interesting point, because he does complain about bilateral Achilles tendon insertional stuff, his words, to quote him. You can see there he's developing, it looks like a little bit of that bumpy thing on the back of the Achilles. Now I have that too on both sides, and for me it's I can correlate that with my calcaneus. Both of them do shit all. They don't evert, they don't plantar flex. I don't have much motion in my calcaneus, and that often can be correlated with that development of that little bumpy bit on the back of the calcaneus, because there's nothing happening in the actual heel bone and a lot of motion through the ankle above, which can lead to all that stuff in the ankle above getting a little grumpy. So do we need to give Garrett back some heel motion? Probably, but how is the question, and in what direction? Eversion, inversion, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, internal rotation, external rotation, all of the above. Okay, but we got another whole rest of the body to look at, not just his foot. So foot is questionable. Does his pelvis get into the right configuration? This is where I was kind of confused in his slower pace walking, is we'd like to see here a hike on the right side of the pelvis. And I'm not really seeing that, but it does kind of look like he for lack of a better word, collapses into this section in his back. Like it just looks like there's a little moment of, I can't think of a better word than collapse, but there's nothing really moving in that right side of the pelvis. So questionable shock absorbing hip mechanics. You can see that there's quite a bit of a tonicity to his lower back extensors here when he gets into pronation. And that's not necessarily bad, because that's, you know, when your foot pronates, the reaction up the chain is going to lead to some extension in the lumbar and thoracic spine. But because there's not a whole lot happening here and not a whole lot happening here, there might be too much here in the lower back. And that might be one of the reasons why he has recently some lower back stuff. Maybe. All right. Moving on. Oopsie. So we'll take him from this foot pronation phase, where he has questionable foot and hip and spine mechanics. Sorry, Garrett. Say it with love. We're going to get him into a mid stance, and we're going to see what it looks like when his feet are roughly next to each other, side by side. So he looks pretty level here, which is great. Ideally, we want to see level pelvis, level shoulders, a foot that's getting into a neutral-ish position. His foot doesn't look to be pronated or supinated. It looks kind of neutral, which would be great if we hadn't just seen that his foot kind of is I was going to say messed up. Not messed up. I'm so sorry. Not messed up, just messy. Doing some messy things. All right, we're going to move him along because I don't have much to say at this point. So let's see what happens when he gets into now his left leg swinging forward into a heel strike. That's a kind of similar shape of his left foot, but even more looks like he's landing on the medial side of it. And even you can see more toes pointing outwards. So same thing, but more extreme on this left foot. And this is where we can see quite a big rotation with his spine. In that particular section there, it looks like rotating to his left. Just to go back and see that when his right leg was swinging through, his spine still looks like it's rotated left. Would you want your spine to rotate right and left? Yes. And when the right leg is forward, we'd want the spine to be rotating to the right. Now, when we go into his left heel strike, you can see there's a lot of arm swing. There's a lot of rib cage rotation to the left. But there's something I am suspicious about. And I need to make sure my brain thinks it knows what it is. Okay, I think my brain knows what it's conceptualizing. Let's find out if it's true or not. I'm just gonna say it and see what happens. So it looks to me like he is getting better over here with his mass. It looks like his whole pelvis can get onto his left leg better, which would be a right hip adduction. Getting the mass towards the front foot. It looks like, this is going to be very crude, but if you had like a dot here in the middle of his body and a dot here where his heel is, they're getting close to being on top of each other. So body on top of foot is kind of happening. Look at his left heel strike, and his left leg almost swings more to the outside of his left hip. And if you take a look at where would be kind of the center of his body, his spine, and where his heel is, I don't know, to me that looks like he doesn't shift his mass as far to the left. So I'm wondering how well he can actually get his weight over to his left leg. And considering that his foot looks a little more compromised in how it's landing on the ground, I wonder if that's making it not super confident for him to get his weight over there, which might explain why he is finding this swing the body to the left really far strategy. There's always got to be some kind of balance in the system. So if the lower half is struggling to efficiently get the mass over his foot, we got to find somewhere else to get to the left from. That's just a speculation I'm making up. We'll have to see what happens by giving Garrett some movement stuff to work on and see if that strategy is correct or not. So that's curious. I do recall, so one of the times that I worked with Garrett, I think I worked with him once online, once in person. And this left ankle was an area of interest, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Might still be a thing. So let's get him into a left foot pronation, rolling him forwards. Does that foot pronate? Not really. It's so funny, like I can't, my mind struggles to make sense of it because he lands pronated in a heel strike. And then it's almost as if he rolls to the outside of his heel. Whoops. This side. Can you see that happening? He lands more on the inside of his heel with his foot turned out, so pronated foot. And then as he gets his foot on the ground, he's now pretty level with his heel, which means he must have tilted out to the side and inverted his heel. Okay, when the foot pronates, we do not want, or when the foot should be pronating in gait, we do not want it to be inverting. Now this is the side, whoopsie, come on thingy. This is the side where it looked like in his faster pace walking that his knee was pointing more out, and it does look like that's the case. I'm seeing a bit more of a, what you'd say as a varus angle of his left tibia. It's more leaning out to the side. Knee looks quite different on this side as well. It doesn't look like it's bending as deeply, and it doesn't look like his leg is internally rotating as much. If we go back to that right side again, just to remind us of what that looked like. It looks like this knee bends a lot more. He has less of that varus leaning out of the tibia. So you could say this is maybe a little tidier here. It looks a bit more how we'd like it. Left side, yeah, right about there. You can see his knee pushing out to the side. Can you see that? Knee out. Knee goes out. whole leg pushes out and his pelvis does not shift to the left. That's super interesting. Looks like his left hip is abducted here. That is super interesting. Abducted meaning that it's not directly beneath his body. So this side looks like his leg is kind of beneath his body, not pushing out. However, when he goes on the left side, his left hip or left leg looks like it pushes out to the side, giving us an abducted left hip. Well, that's kind of funky. And it's funky because what we'd like to see here in this particular moment in time as he's walking is a foot that is pronating, a knee that is bending, and a hip that is adducting. He's not really got any of the above, but his foot is kind of pronating here in heel strike when it shouldn't be. How did you get this way, Garrett? What is going on? So right away, I'm thinking further assessment. I would want to see if this is true about his hips. Can he adduct his left hip? And in general, what's the quality of pronation and supination in both of his feet? Now, let's just see what happens going forward from here. So he's finished pronating kind of his foot. Oh, no, he hasn't, because look at it go. Look at this foot. So he doesn't pronate. Okay, so he pronates a bit here when he shouldn't be. And then when he should be pronating, he doesn't. But then watch what happens here. As he swings his right leg through, look at his left foot start to pronate more. So again, that's not when you want to see the foot pronating. Garrett, you're completely backwards. That's awesome to see that. And I wonder if the reason why his foot is pronating so much there is the way that his pelvis is dragging his whole body to the right. So if a pelvis is moving more to the right and not very much to the left, it's going to pull that foot into a E version, which is the shape that we're seeing here of this foot more weighted on the inside edge. What we want to see right here on this left foot is more of a supinated foot. Was that happening on his other side? Looks a bit nicer, doesn't it? This back foot, it looks less like it's getting dragged in. And I wonder if that's because his pelvis isn't even barely moving to the left. So we have this saying in Anatomy in Motion that the talus drives the bus. So the talus is one of these bones in the ankle. And we say it drives the bus, and the bus is the pelvis. So if the talus points to the left, then we want to see also the pelvis getting rotated to the left. But it can work from the top about the try that sentence again. It can work from the bottom up as well. So if the or rather it can work from the top down. That's what I meant to say. The bus can drive the talus. So if we have a bus, a pelvis that's only going to the right, it's going to drag potentially those taluses to the right with it. And it might look something like a pronated foot back here when it should be propelling from a supinated position. But let's just see if that happens in other footsteps, because it definitely is happening here. He's got a little bit of a different funky thing happening on his right foot when it's behind him. He doesn't have such a dragged inwards looking foot, but it does look like this knee bends quite excessively. So much more of his foot comes off the ground here. Look how much of the bottom of his foot you can see. However, here, it's less, oh, well, maybe it is coming up quite a bit as well. But what stands out more is that it's getting dragged that way. Whereas this one just peels up. This right foot, I mean, it comes up, but it doesn't get that same dragged inwards motion. What was I doing right? I wanted to compare multiple footsteps. And even in this left leg back position, you can see that leg bone angled out to the side, that abduction, that it's so different. Look at the angle of his right leg when it's behind him. It's more straight up and down. It's not sticking out that way. But his left leg pushes out to the side. So I am really interested in if that left hip can adduct. And if that left hip could adduct, would that change how his spine is rotating? So I'd want to get him to assess his spine rotations. Maybe Garrett, you can see, does your spine just standing feet side by side, does your spine rotate evenly right and left? I'd be curious about what that's like. And then if that would change if we did anything with left hip accessing adduction better. And on the flip side, his right hip accessing abduction. I don't know if it's really the key and the lock is the right side needing that abduction or the left side needing the adduction. Not sure which is going to be the biggest impact. It's probably both. And I'm curious about any history potentially on this left side that is maybe one of the correlates to why he's more set up to weight bear on the right leg. All right. So I could probably say more, but I think that's actually a good place to leave it. And maybe Garrett can give us some feedback on his observations from his perspective and if that tracks with his experience. So thanks, Garrett, for letting us scrutinize you walking. Appreciate it. And I believe this video is going to be on YouTube. So anyone watching who has questions, comments, observations, things they just need to get out, write them in the comments and have a bit of discussion about it. All right, that's all for today. Thanks for watching.